Hi, my name is Dean Walton. I'm from the University of Oregon, and today I'm going to be talking about expanding and prioritizing a Motus radio receiver network in Western North America. So first of all, what is Motus? Why would we care? So Motus is a network of radio receivers, and these radio receivers are designed to pick up tags on tagged animals, whether it's birds, whether it is mammals, bats, even tortoises. That is the design. There are two sets of tags at two different frequencies, and these tags are actively beaconing tags. So they actually are not like RFID tags. They have a battery or a solar panel on them, very small solar panel. And of course, depending on the bird's size, these systems can beacon out every few seconds or once an hour, something in that realm. And then we have the two frequencies. One is a UHF frequency at 434 megahertz. The other one is a frequency of 166.38 megahertz, which is a VHF frequency, which doesn't matter too much except that the VHF tags require a larger antenna array. It's about twice as large. But these are still small, so even though maybe twice as large, they're not huge antennas. So they're very easy to put up in multiple places. And you can see here that North America is where the Motus network dominates. But there is, a good network in Europe. And then we see scattered receiver stations, Australia, Africa, Asia. And within the North American continent, it predominates in the North Atlantic region. And here we can see something like Nova Scotia. Its whole coastal outline is almost outlined by Motus receiver stations. However, the network is much more diffuse in the Pacific Northwest, where I am. And in fact, a lot of these dots didn't exist just like 2 years ago. So there's been tremendous growth in the network in just the last 2 years. When I got involved, there were just two stations in Oregon, the Rogue River Preserve and the Vesper Meadows Preserve, which are the two dots there in Oregon that would be at the bottom of its border in that sort of a darker forested area, so the bottom left of Oregon. And then I got involved. I got a station going in the Eugene-Willamette Valley area, and now we have 8 stations going. So rapid growth, which is great because this is what we want. Now, what does a station look like? Here on the left, we see what is called a sensor node. It is a very small station. It basically is a Raspberry Pi with a GPS antenna on that, and it can pick up these tags. For testing purposes, we have this very small antenna that is there bottom left. This is not what you'd use in the field, but it allows us to test with a test tag. On the right-hand side, we have a sensor station put out by a company called CTT. It has its own built-in radio receivers. It has 5 of them, so 5 different antennas for that. Actually, it has 6. And then on the left-hand side, it has ports where we can add additional antennas. And this is where we can add radio receivers for the other low-tech tags, which are at the 166 megahertz frequency. So that little black pillar and 2 silver pillars behind it are software-defined radios. So they're radio receivers programmed to pick up the 166.38 megahertz signal. The gold ports center top, the little circuit boards up there, they're designed to pick up the 434 megahertz signal. And then on the right-hand side, we have a little black box that is a power over Ethernet. The power of the device is very low power, and we can use solar panels for this. And we can see that it's in a Pelican box, so it's a waterproof box designed to be out in the field. It can be out all season, attached to a solar panel, and you have an active antenna station in the middle of nowhere, powered by solar power. So that's what a station looks like. Now, our goal is to figure out where to place these. And if we look at a map of the Pacific Flyway, we can see that the Pacific Flyway is pretty darn broad, really covering, at least a quarter, if not more, of the United States and parts of North America there. And this really tells us there's probably multiple flyways that are just undefined, that are very particular to specific species. We just don't have the data to understand that. So the goal, obviously, is to make that a reality so we know what those flyways are. So the first thing that we need to do in prioritizing a network really is to make sure that we are, placing our receivers in places where we're going to find the right organisms. So right now, if we're looking at birds and bats, with birds, we're going to look at wetlands, bats are the same way, and these give, at least for large migratory waterfowl, places where birds will reside at wetlands for longer periods of time for greater detection. So that's an additional goal. There could be different strategies for determining local movements of birds. But if we're looking at larger migrations, we're going to put them at places where we know there's going to be migratory birds staying for some resident period of time first. So, we get into other smaller birds, we'll have to place those in other forested areas, but prioritization to places where we know there's going to be birds that we can easily tag and capture data from. We want access to the land, so that's another important part. Not a big problem in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of public land. It's not necessary to have public land. It makes it easier. And also, it gives us the habitat. We're looking at, in some places, looking at schools where either at universities, high schools, to get those students there involved, and because it's easier to have something there. So can access. We'll get into some other things lower down why the schools are good too. We want security. So you don't want to put up a tower in a place where your radio receiver is going to get stolen right off the bat, or it's going to get shot at or vandalized in some way. So you want to make sure you have it in a safe place. Something that is not typically thought about by a lot of conservation biologists is like a view shed. So in this case, we have a radio or radio receiver receptive view shed. This is where we can receive data from, and we'll get into how we're using GIS to do that. And then we want a power source. We can use solar is quite easy in many remote places. So since we just need a few volts and very low current for these things, it's very easy to use solar panels to power these devices. But having an existing tower makes it easy. Having an existing tower also makes something easy. So we are looking at places where there is existing infrastructure where we can just go and put an antenna on a tower. In many cases, we have to put up new towers, but it's easy if the tower is already there. And again, building structures give us security, give us power, protect stuff. And then if we have access to the internet, we can continually download data 24 hours a day to a cloud storage area. And if we don't have that and we're in the middle of nowhere, then we need to be able to access the point either by a vehicle, then walk to somewhere, get close enough where we can use a computer with Wi-Fi, and we can make a Wi-Fi connection. And if not that, physically walk up to the device and take out an SD card and load data and put an SD card back in. So those are things. So challenges, but we're going for the low-hanging fruit first. All right. Again, I mentioned Pacific Northwest, a lot of public land. So it gives us many places where we can do this. So that part is not the issue for us. And then we formed a network. So with our network, we have a bunch of biologists, many different groups. We have American Bird Conservancy, folks from USGS, folks from Oregon Fish and Wildlife, Washington State Fish and Wildlife, got together to form a collective to work on trying to prioritize these sites. And just by thinking of, talking to our biologists and saying, hey, where do you think are good spots? We put points on a map. So that was one of our first GIS products. And then we could decide, like there on the Oregon coast in the upper northern section on the left, we see a lot of points close together. So we might decide we need to pick one or two of those and not pick the 10 that show up there. So trying to prioritize, but this was like, just do the mind dump. So going back to our view shed, we are using directional antennas to collect this data. So these antennas point a certain direction, and that allows us to pick up birds that are in that direction. But there's a limit to the distance that those beacons on the radio tags can transmit data. And that could be, limited to about 10 to 15 kilometers. So something further away gets a little bit difficult to pick up. So in order to represent how well we're doing, we create antenna beam diagrams. So we can see where we're looking, where the antennas are looking. And there in the upper left, near Aberdeen, we have a station that has an antenna pointing north, pointing northeast, and one pointing east. On the right-hand side, near Boise, we have an antenna system that is spread out 120 degrees for the 3 antennas, for a full 360-degree view. So that's great. There in the bottom left near Medford, this is the Rogue River and Vesper Meadows sites. We have a north and south pointing antenna, an east pointing antenna, and there in Eugene there is a small western pointing antenna. So we figured, well, there's probably better ways to do this. And so we created buffers around our stations, a 10-kilometer buffer, radius buffer, to see what the view shed was. And this gives us an idea to see, if we have a station here, are we covering the areas that we want? And there we get to see that representation. So that just, again, helps in our prioritization. Here we have a station, a very new one in Oregon. This is at the Ankeny Wildlife Refuge. And although the ground looks relatively flat there, it's up on a hill, and the ground below is, that wetland on there is 60 feet or 20 meters below the antenna station. And then the antenna station has another 3-meter height above ground. So for a receiver station, this is great for this area. We're up on a hill, we have a great view shed of the local area. And we can represent that, or more, maybe more realistically, show the terrain in the radio receptive using something like a Google Earth's view shed analysis tool. So the yellow point dead center is that tower. That tower is 12 feet off the ground at the highest point of the antenna, and based on that 12-foot, 3-meter position, 4-meter position, we can get the view shed for that antenna. The wildlife refuge is in green, and so it covers the whole wildlife refuge, which is great, and then extends well beyond it to the to the west, but there to the west, there to the south, but there is a lack of reception to the east and to the north. And even to the southwest, there is a hole. So, and we can see a closer view of this right here, where in the upper right, we see the position for the tower, and then we can see the receptive area to the south and west. Due south, there is, because of some rolling hills, some shadows, and they're going to get those areas covered by adding some additional nodes that will talk to the main antenna. And then you notice that there's a sort of a comb look to some of the shadows. Those are trees. So the trees are creating shadows that create the tines of a comb that give that. In the lower left, you see that sort of pattern of little shadows. So those are caused by trees, which again can block, potentially block the signal a little bit. So that's just one area. One of the areas, great. Another area we got going is at the bottom of the Willamette Valley, at the Fern Ridge Reservoir area. And this is the biggest wetland in the Willamette Valley, and one of the biggest open wetlands in Oregon. Not the biggest, but it's up there. So good location. And we had a local landowner, the Oregon Country Fair. They hold a local festival, sort of a music art festival, once a year. And the other times of the year, the land is kept as a nature preserve. But they have a building. They already have a radio tower that they use for communication during the fair. And so up there on the right, we're putting up an antenna for a bird tag there. Now this ground here is quite flat. So in contrast to the Ankeny spot, which is up on a hill, this one gives us a lot less receptive area. Even though it is 60 feet or 3 times higher off the ground, it's not on a hill. So it does do the job for the fair, who wants to know what's going on locally with wildlife on its property and would love to be a part of the project. But to the upper right, we see the Fern Ridge Reservoir, and we get some coverage of it there in the very top right. But there's many areas where there's no reception because of the terrain. So this gave us at least an initial test spot, working partner, easy to set up, but not the greatest place. But our analysis showed that if we were able to put a point on the Fern Ridge Reservoir where there's a dam, Corps of Engineer dam, that gave us phenomenal reception for the wetland areas. So we almost have full coverage of the open wetland areas, and we have phenomenal coverage of these bottomland wetlands to the south and east. We also have some good coverage to the northeast, which is open farmland. So this is a great spot, and we're pretty happy with that position. It's not there yet, but we are happy with that position, and so our goal is there. Plus, it gives us security, power, things like that. So it's a great spot. Has everything we want for a locality. Maybe too much security, but that's not really a problem. So other spots that come along like that, we mapped out where we knew sites that were already identified by the biologists that we know have infrastructure where there was a building, a tower, power, things like that. So they show up on our map. So that became priority spots. Finally, most of the work that I did was done with QGIS or Google Earth Pro, and to create the viewshed maps. But there was not a good way to share the data. And since many of our partners are state and federal agencies, and even our NGOs, they're used to doing a lot of work with ArcGIS. And so we ported our data into ArcGIS Online, where it made it easy to share. So that was a great tool there. So this makes it quite easy. And many of the partners are more familiar with ArcGIS than QGIS. And we can even do things like create even better quality viewshed maps than I was doing with Google Earth with the ArcGIS Pro. And so here we have a shared viewshed map of some stations in Washington that show the antenna viewshed there. So in the end, this is how we're prioritizing the project. And with that, I'd like to thank the partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, William Blake, very helpful with American Bird Conservancy, sort of the driving force of this right now, Joan Hagar and her work with organizing the local network, partners from USGS, Klamath Bird Observatory, Oregon Fish and Wildlife, partners at Willamette University, obviously Motus, our partners at the Oregon Country Fair, the MPG Ranch, where William Blake used to work, University of Oregon, where I come from, Corps of Engineers, and some really cool bat work going on at Oregon State University's Cascade campus. And with that, I'll say thank you for listening.